The afternoon slowly descended over the small town, bathing the window of Sofia's flower shop in golden hues that highlighted the vibrant colors of the flowers. Amid the soft scent of roses and the whisper of leaves, Sofia moved with the familiarity of someone who knew every petal, every detail of her little paradise. The tranquility of that day was interrupted by the chime of the doorbell, a sound that promised something new. The man who entered was young, with disheveled hair and a curious look. He carried an unease that Sofia recognized from afar. He paused, observing the flowers as if searching for an answer he hadn't yet formed. There was something in his posture, a mix of expectation and vulnerability, that made her hold her breath for a moment. Sofia felt like a soft breeze, that this encounter would be different from all the others. Pedro, an aspiring poet, moved among the flowers with the hesitation of someone entranced by an unknown world. His eyes, attentive and meticulous, lingered on the details, the delicate layers of peonies, the dewy shine of lily petals. There was a kind of enchantment in his expression, an admiration that transcended beauty and turned into silent poetry. Sofia watched from afar, unaware that the first verse of their story was being written in that moment. Sofia's hands trembled slightly as she arranged a bouquet on the counter, a careful combination of colors and textures that mirrored her own state of mind, a mix of anxiety and curiosity. She watched Pedro approach, her heart beating faster, as if she already recognized in him a spark of something long lost. The air seemed thick with expectation, and every move she made carried a deeper meaning. Pedro stopped in front of the counter, his eyes full of melancholy that spoke of unfulfilled dreams and untold stories. Sofia realized at that moment that her own solitude, cultivated like the plants in her little haven, might find an echo in the voice of this stranger. The silence that settled between them was charged with something undefined, a promise that blossomed slowly. Memories of the past came to Sofia's mind, of days when she dreamed of stories that went beyond the flower shop, stories in which she was the protagonist and not just an observer. But life, with its cruel precision, had taught her to nurture expectations like she did her plants, with care and boundaries. Yet that encounter awakened an emotion in her that had long been dormant, like a forgotten seed. Pedro left the shop with a bouquet in hand but left more than coins on the counter. He sowed a restlessness in Sofia's heart, a curiosity that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't for years. As the doorbell chimed one last time, Sofia closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of the flowers and hearing, in her mind, the murmur of verses starting to form without her realizing. The following weeks brought Pedro to Sofia's flower shop as regularly as a season that refuses to leave. There was always an excuse for his presence. A new poem to be inspired, a different flower to study. Sofia pretended not to notice the pretexts, but inside, each encounter added a new color to the palette of her emotions. The sweet aroma of the flowers became synonymous with the sound of familiar footsteps and a presence that filled the shop in a way she couldn't explain. The glances exchanged between them were always brief but intense. While Pedro mentally recited words he never dared to say aloud, Sofia felt the warmth of a connection pulsing in every silent dialogue. The flower shop, once just a refuge for her lonely heart, became a stage for something new and intangible, like a romance unfolding slowly amid the scent of roses and the whisper of leaves. Sofia began to notice the small things, the way Pedro's fingers traced the petals as if touching a work of art, the soft sighs he let out when admiring a freshly made arrangement. And Pedro, in return, captured in unwritten verses the curve of her smile and the sparkle in her eyes that hid stories he longed to uncover. The time they spent together was always brief but left traces that echoed in their solitary nights. The days passed in a confusing rhythm, and the flower shop took on the air of a secret refuge. Sofia found herself looking at the door every time the bell rang, anxiety growing in her chest when he walked in with that smile that spoke more than words. The sound of conversations, sometimes drifting into poetry and literature, brought a warmth that made loneliness seem like a distant nightmare. With each visit, Pedro left a piece of himself in the form of poetry. Unbeknownst to her, Sofia became his muse. Among the bouquets and the sweet aroma of freshly cut flowers, she discovered a world of verses he wrote that subtly told the story they were beginning to live. His words touched her soul, not for their sophistication but for the truth they carried, the reflection of what they both felt but did not admit. Sofia began to keep, like small treasures, the pages Pedro left intentionally on the counter. Each poem was an intimate portrait of how he saw her. Beauty disguised as simplicity, strength wrapped in kindness. The words, soft and dense, were like the flowers she nurtured, fragile but powerful in their fleeting nature. She read each line when the shop was empty, her heart filling with a tenderness that made her hesitate, afraid of losing herself in it. The scent of the flowers mixed with the growing feelings between them, like an invisible thread connecting them. Sofia began to allow herself to dream, even if the dream was made of stolen moments between customers, between a pause and a poem. Time seemed suspended in those encounters, but she knew that the scent of romance, like all beautiful things, could be as fleeting as the petals that fell when the wind blew. Summer arrived with its long, hot days, bringing with it a new energy to the town and an unexpected change to Sofia's flower shop. Pedro's visits became less frequent, his eyes often lost in distant thoughts, as if his heart was no longer fully present. Sofia, though she tried to hide it, felt each absence like a fallen petal, a sign that change was approaching. Pedro entered the shop one last time that month, his expression a mix of excitement and silent regret. In his hands he held a letter with an important seal, something Sofia couldn't ignore. The proposal to publish his first book had arrived, a dream he had cherished for years, but one that came with a price no poem could soothe. The news lingered between them like a shadow, stealing the light from their shared afternoons and leaving an echo of longing. Sofia felt a bittersweet ache. The smile she offered was genuine but tinged with a sadness she tried to mask. It wasn't the first time she had seen someone leave in search of something bigger, but with Pedro the pain was more intense, more personal. She knew her feelings couldn't be an anchor holding him back, and she accepted, with a tightness in her chest, the promise he made. He would return as soon as he could. That night, the flower shop felt quieter than ever. Sofia ran her fingers over the flowers, feeling the soft touch of the petals as if they were the words Pedro hadn't spoken. He had left without a long farewell, just one last look that spoke more than any verse he had written. She wondered how many more times that doorbell would chime before she heard it for him again. The following days were a whirlwind of memories. Sofia remembered their conversations, their glances, the poems left like traces of a feeling never spoken aloud. There was hope in her memories, but also a silent pain that settled in her heart, like a plant growing slowly, taking root without permission. She closed the shop at night, listening to the echo of his absence and wondering if promises could survive the distance. As Pedro ventured to the new city, diving into a world of publishers, public readings, and applause, Sofia kept to her routine. Each morning began with the opening of the blinds, the familiar smell of flowers, and a longing that became a constant companion. Pedro, amidst the excitement of the new, felt a kind of emptiness. Each verse he wrote in the new city carried a hint of nostalgia, as if his muse was an ocean away. The last bouquet Pedro bought still adorned the corner of the flower shop, its petals drying slowly, but holding on to a faint scent that seemed to persist. Sofia looked at it, lost in thought, feeling that even without words, their story was not over. Uncertainty kept her awake, but also in a way alive. She knew that flowers continued to grow, even in uncertain soil, and that was all she could hope for at that moment. At first, the messages between Sofia and Pedro still carried the familiarity of the days spent in the flower shop. They were quick and full of longing, a desperate attempt to keep the flame that connected them alive. But Pedro's new life, filled with commitments and new voices, began to occupy the spaces that once belonged solely to Sofia. The distance, invisible and insidious, settled between the unspoken words. Sofia woke up every morning with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, waiting to see the light of her phone blinking with news from him. Days turned into weeks, and the messages that once brought warmth began to cool. Pedro replied with the urgency of someone living in another world, where the sound of applause and the lights of auditoriums replaced intimate conversations about poetry and flowers. Sofia tried to ignore the growing emptiness but knew that, no matter how much she wanted, she could not reach that distant world. Silence became a new companion. Sofia made an effort not to let the walls of the flower shop close in on her, keeping herself busy with arrangements and caring for each flower as if they were whispered secrets among the leaves. But the echo of unsaid words haunted her, and Pedro's absence filled the air with a melancholy that petals could not mask. At night, the city calmed, and the darkness brought memories to the surface. Sofia allowed herself to sit by the window, watching the empty street while the cool wind caressed her face. The memory of Pedro's gaze before he left returned, a reminder of what had not yet broken but was on the verge of disappearing. Each moment she held the phone without the courage to write was proof that time and distance were winning a battle she did not know she was fighting. Pedro, on the other hand, drowned in a storm of conflicting emotions. The success he had always dreamed of came with a weight he had not foreseen. Between one book signing and another, he found brief moments of quiet where Sofia's image surfaced in his mind. In those pauses, he felt her absence as a void that not even the most enthusiastic applause could fill. But life went on, and he, swallowed by its relentless pace, kept postponing his return to what truly mattered. Sofia realized over time that she hoped less and accepted more. The flower shop became her refuge and solace, a reminder that even in the absence of rain, flowers could still survive. She continued to care for each plant, each arrangement, as if it were a way to keep hope alive, even if silently. Loneliness was no longer just a void. It was a choice, a way to protect what was left of her heart. The last glimpse of a future with Pedro began to fade, but Sofia still refused to let him become just a memory. The soft scent of the flowers he once admired still filled the shop, a testament to what they once shared. And as the silence stretched on, she understood that not all love remains intact but can persist, even in its quietest form. Time took its course, dragging at first and then speeding up, like a river flowing forcefully between rocks. The seasons passed, and Sofia watched her life turn into a cycle of work and silence. The flower shop grew, becoming known in town for its beauty and the peace it offered to anyone who entered. The clientele diversified, and the space that had once been filled with Pedro's visits now became a haven for souls seeking comfort. Decades passed like leaves carried by the wind. Sofia, now with gentle marks of time on her face, still found joy in her garden of flowers. Each morning brought new customers, new stories, and new smiles. The flower shop had become more than just a business. It was a home, a place where she could hide from the world and at the same time, share it with those who needed it. Pedro, in turn, had become a renowned figure. His poetry traveled across continents, translated into different languages, brought to life by voices he would never hear in person. But amidst the acclaim and the spotlight, there were moments of silence when Sofia's name surfaced, like a whisper he could never silence. The success he once dreamed of did not bring the warmth he had expected. It was cold and distant, a shadow of what truly mattered. Sofia felt Pedro's absence as a persistent memory, a phantom pain that appeared on lonely nights. She wondered sometimes if he still thought of her, if the flowers he once loved still appeared in his poems. But life, with its inexorable force, pushed her forward, and she learned to find contentment in what she could control. The flower shop continued to bloom, just as she did. There was a corner in the shop where she kept a bouquet of dried flowers, the last one Pedro had bought. It had become a silent symbol of an unfinished story, a reminder that not everything beautiful needs to be perfect or complete. Sometimes customers asked about the aged arrangement, and Sofia would simply smile enigmatically, as if holding on to a secret that couldn't be explained in words. In the pauses between his travels, Pedro reflected on how his life had taken a path that, though desired, left him unfulfilled. He was surrounded by praise, but none of it filled the void he felt when he remembered the scent of fresh flowers and the sound of the shop's doorbell. The echo of those memories was a silent melody he couldn't shake, a reminder that some parts of the soul never forget what truly touched them. Over the years, Sofia accepted that longing could coexist with happiness. Her heart, though marked by absences, still beat strongly, finding joy in the small details and the resilience of the flowers that continued to grow, no matter what happened around them. And so life went on like a garden in constant renewal, waiting for the next season to bring something unexpected. It was an ordinary morning when Sofia, amidst the hustle of opening the shop, overheard two customers discussing the literary event of the month. Pedro's name surfaced like a breath, making her pause, fingers still holding the ribbon she used to tie an arrangement. He was coming back to town to launch his new book, and a book signing was scheduled in a bookstore not far away. Sofia's heart quickened with a mix of surprise and nostalgia. The news brought a flood of memories she had carefully kept, like petals pressed between the pages of an old book. The decision to go to the event did not come immediately. The fear of seeing his face and reliving what had been left unfinished made her hesitate. But at night, between the silence of her house and the soft scent of the flowers, curiosity and longing intertwined, forming a silent determination. The days leading up to the event were full of restlessness. Sofia found herself thinking about what it would be like to see him after so many years, whether time had softened the lines of his face or if his eyes still carried that melancholic glow. She questioned her own reasons, whether it was just nostalgia or a deeper desire to reconnect with the one who once meant everything. The doubt, however, did not stop her from putting on her best dress and walking to the bookstore when the day arrived. The place was packed, filled with people murmuring and leafing through books, seeking a moment of connection with the renowned poet. Sofia positioned herself at the back, in no rush to approach. The atmosphere was different from the flower shop, but the scent of paper and the quiet reverence brought a strange comfort. And then she saw him, at the center of all that attention, with the same expression that mixed charm and seriousness. Pedro seemed at ease, but there was a trace of fatigue in his gaze. As he signed books, his expressions shifted between smiles and gratitude, but something was absent in his face. When his eyes scanned the room and found Sofia's, time seemed to stop. It was just a moment, but it was filled with everything left unsaid and all the memories time couldn't erase. Sofia felt the weight of that look, a mix of surprise and something deeper, making her heart race. The moment lasted only seconds, but she knew he had seen her, and that her presence had brought back the past they had buried under layers of silence. Pedro looked away and continued attending to the readers, but Sofia noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a sign that the memories were still alive. When the session ended, Sofia hesitated for a moment, watching the crowd disperse. She didn't know whether to approach or let the reunion remain on the surface. But before she could decide, Pedro looked at her again, and the silence between them was filled with possibilities and doubts. She felt that the words left unspoken years ago might finally find a space to emerge. The noise of footsteps and murmured conversations diminished until the bookstore was almost silent. Pedro remained at the center of the room, surrounded by books and the memories that Sofia's unexpected presence had brought to life. The years of success, travels, and acclaim seemed insignificant in that moment. He looked around and realized that, despite the room full of unfamiliar faces, it was Sofia's gaze that continued to haunt him. Sofia took a hesitant step toward the table where Pedro sat. Each movement felt heavier than the last, as if each step unfolded a decade lost. A latent nervousness tightened her chest, but there was also a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Pedro watched her, his heart pounding, feeling a familiar ache, a mix of longing and regret. When they finally stood face to face, the silence that enveloped them was palpable. Pedro noticed the subtle changes in Sofia, the gentle lines around her eyes, the serene look on her face. She still possessed the same presence that once inspired his best verses, but now there was something more, a touch of resilience that made him realize how much she had lived and grown without him. Sofia felt the warmth radiating from Pedro and noticed that, although time had left its marks, his eyes still held the same brightness. It was as if the space between them was filled with all the words that had never been spoken. The tension was familiar but different, matured by the years and the experiences that had separated them. She saw in him a part that she recognized, and it made her catch her breath. Pedro broke eye contact for a moment, looking down at his hands, which still held the pen he had used to sign books for strangers. But Sofia was no stranger. She was the lost muse, the memory that had kept him awake on lonely nights. The emotion made his hands tremble slightly, and he knew this was a rare chance, an intersection of past and present that could not be ignored. The silence transformed into a dialogue of looks and breaths, and the bookstore around them faded away. Sofia felt the intensity of the moment, as if all the weight of the years had culminated right there. She wanted to ask so much, to share so much, but she realized the words could wait. The reunion was a conversation in itself, an exchange of feelings that time and distance hadn't managed to erase. Pedro leaned forward slightly, his gaze firm and sincere, as if waiting for a sign. Sofia saw the same question in his eyes that hovered in the air. Was there room to start again? The answer was not yet clear, but the simple fact that they were there, facing each other, suggested that maybe there was. The bookstore seemed to breathe with them, and the world outside vanished for a moment. Sofia felt hope bloom, timid but alive, among the memories and promises that the silent encounter carried. The next morning brought a gentle light filtering through Sofia's curtains. The encounter with Pedro at the bookstore resonated in her mind like an echo she couldn't dispel. There were unanswered questions and a mix of emotions that kept her restless. She knew that if the past could speak, it would have much to say. But the present brought a choice, to face what had been left behind or to move forward, accepting silence as a final answer. Pedro had spent the night awake, the pages of his new book open before him, but his thoughts were on Sofia. He remembered the days when every poem was inspired by her, how the words flowed as naturally as breathing. But now, after years of distance and choices made, he wondered if there was still space to reclaim what had been lost. The weight of his decisions followed him like a shadow, reminding him of the cost of success. When they met again, away from the eyes of the bookstore, the setting was different. The park, with its old trees and flowers swaying in the wind, seemed like neutral ground, a stage where past and present intertwined. The silence between them was no longer just the absence of words but a pause heavy with meaning, like a verse that had never been finished. Sofia's heart felt heavy, but she was determined to hear what Pedro had to say. Pedro, with trembling hands, began to share his side of the story, the reasons that had driven him away. He spoke about the pressure, the career, the loneliness that grew even amid the crowds that applauded him. Sofia listened, pain and nostalgia mingling in her chest. Each of Pedro's sentences brought back memories but also offered a new perspective on why the letters had stopped and the contact had dwindled to nothing. The distance had been not just physical but emotional, a barrier he hadn't known how to break. Sofia couldn't hide the hurt that had accompanied her for so many years. She told him what it was like to move on, how his silence turned her nights into an emptiness she filled with work and flowers. Pedro felt the guilt dig deep, but he also saw that Sofia's strength was even more striking than he remembered. There was a beauty in her pain, a resilience he hadn't fully understood before. The wind blew, stirring the flowers around them and creating a soft sound as if the world waited for the next word. Both stood in silence, absorbing the raw truth between them. Pedro looked down, unsure if what remained between them was strong enough to support a new beginning. Sofia, her gaze fixed on the horizon, knew that whatever decision they made there would define not just the future, but also how they would come to terms with the past. Finally, Pedro raised his eyes and met hers. Sofia felt a shiver, a mix of fear and hope. There was still something there, a spark that stubbornly resisted. But the question remained, were they willing to cultivate again what they had let wilt? The moment seemed to stretch as they both wondered if the love they had was an unfinished poem, or if it could be rewritten with new words. The days following their meeting in the park were a mix of silence and reflection for Sofia. She continued her routine in the flower shop, but something in her heart had changed. The air felt lighter and memories of Pedro were no longer just painful. They became part of a story that still had the potential to be written. Each flower she touched reminded her that even the most fragile plants could bloom again if tended to with care. Pedro, on the other hand, spent his nights at his desk, surrounded by drafts and words that refused to align. The poet he had become now faced a challenge that no book or recognition could resolve. He knew that if he wanted to win Sofia back, he needed to do more than promise. He needed to show that between the forgotten verses and broken promises, there was still truth and feeling. One sunny morning, Pedro appeared at the flower shop, his gaze determined and his expression full of hope. In his hands he held a worn notebook, marked by time and the stories it contained. Sofia, seeing him, felt a mix of surprise and emotion. The silence that followed was filled with the fragrance of flowers and the anticipation of something new, something both had been hoping for, but were unsure how to approach. Pedro handed her the notebook without a word. Sofia opened it carefully, turning the pages and reading the poems that spoke of longing, regret, and a love that had never ceased to exist. Each word was a confession, a reminder that even in the distance, he had carried her in his thoughts. Silent tears traced down her cheeks as she read, and a warmth began to stir in her heart. With eyes glistening, Sofia lifted her gaze and met Pedro's. He knew that words could reach a heart but couldn't heal it alone. However, Sofia's expression was no longer one of hurt but of understanding. There was a glimmer of hope, an acknowledgement that both had changed but could still share something real. The moment was delicate but full of possibilities. Sofia walked over to the table where she often arranged her bouquets, and with careful hands, selected flowers that symbolized renewal and new beginnings. She put together a bouquet with soft colors and handed it to Pedro, who accepted it with contained emotion. The gesture, simple yet significant, was a silent answer, a promise that although the past was marked by missed chances, the future could be nurtured with fresh hope. They stood there side by side without hurry. The sun bathed the shop in light, and the scent of flowers filled the air, as if celebrating the start of something new. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was a space where trust could grow again. Pedro, his heart light, knew the journey ahead would be long, but with Sofia by his side, he felt he could write not just poems but a new story, filled with flowers and verses that would never go untold again. Sofia and Pedro's story reminds us that time can be both an enemy and an ally. Sometimes the choices we make, no matter how necessary, pull us away from those we love. But it is the courage to face the past and the vulnerability to start again that truly define our lives. The years had changed them but also prepared them to realize that even among wilted flowers and unfinished verses, there is always the possibility of new growth. True love is resilient, and forgiveness is the key that allows it to bloom again, even after long winters. If you enjoyed this touching story of reunion and renewal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive more stories that will touch your heart. Share this video with friends and family so they too can be moved by stories of love that transcend time and distance. Thank you for watching and see you next time.